that line that starts in Whitby goes to goes to Roma.
I know the story like the back of my hand. 'Cause
Well, death and taxes are the only certainty. Well, 20% of people of society. And I have made it on my own in this world. Well, nothing to get a turn around a 2-year-old. I'm gonna stop the old nation and do my own thing, and I will be king. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation. Well, let me talk a bit about the weather. You must admit it's not very clever. Don't get me wrong, it's not an anti-British song. Well, there is nowhere I would rather be wrong. I'm gonna stop the old nation and do my own thing, and I will be king. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation. There are just a few things that I would like to say about the UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up, but you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation. I'm gonna stop the old nation from the self-preservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Hello, Pop Pickers. It's so lovely to see you again. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Political Unmuted. I never know the number. So we'll go to our maths man. Paul, what number are we? Do you know?
Yeah, we're 117, and Laura wanted us to know that it is called Maths is Romantic, and I have to explain that.
You do, because
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who hated maths. Go on, what
So-
maths is romantic?
So I did maths at uni, and maths teacher, and when when me and Laura first got together, I thought it'd be hilarious to do an equation, give her an equation that was called a cardioid. It's the shape of a heart. It's 1 minus sine theta or something like that. There's an R in there somewhere. I can't even remember what it is now. But I gave her an equation because I thought it was hilarious to think maths was romantic. So there you go. That's why it's called that.
You little softy. With
I wasn't being soft. I was trying to be incredibly funny, thinking that someone would try and romance someone with maths. And I was that much of a nerd. That was what I was trying to portray to her.
Well, it clearly worked, Paul.
It was all right. It didn't work out too bad.
I like the fact that it's romantic. Most people find it torturous, but I'm not going to go any further with that.
R equals
we'll
1
be
minus
talking
sine
about that,
theta.
ladies and gentlemen, in our last topic of the evening, and we've got 2 other incredible topics for you, and I welcome the people who are going to be talking about them. Jane!
Hello.
I know you're all on your own against these 3 dreadful men talking about maths and trains. Neil and I were talking about trains before we started. So you must assert yourself. Put us in our place. And welcome, Neil. Hello.
Hi, John. How are you?
Absolutely fine, thank you. Oh, yeah, yes, another train. Yes. And our maths geek, romantic maths geek, Paul. God bless you. So lovely to see you. Thank you. And let's start.
And if Kirsty's watching, it's
moment that we can't hear anything. The sound isn't working today. So if we're all looking a bit blank at each other and sort of who goes next, that's what it's all about. Let's who are we going to start with? Jane, what's your moment of the week, please?
So my moment of the week, and you very kindly said I could have 2 moments of the week.
You can have 2
Thank
moments of the
thank
week because you're very important to us.
Thank you. So the first one was I think it's called The Big One, which were the peaceful demonstrations held by Extinction Rebellion and a number of other groups they're working with. I think it's as many as 200 groups altogether they've combined with. This was a kind of change of direction for them temporarily, from civil disobedience to a more straightforward peaceful protest, to bring more people on board, and it gained a huge amount of people, but a very tiny amount of media attention in our mainstream media. So people outside of London probably don't know that it happened, unless you're interested in these kind of things and reading the independent media. And the second moment was a really horrible moment, when the 2 peaceful protesters were handed down prison sentences, I think of 2.5 and 3 years, was it, for blocking the motorway last year in a peaceful protest to raise awareness about the deaths that are already happening around the world and the displacement, people driven out of their homes by famine and flood through climate change. And these people made a peaceful protest to try to raise awareness to stop more people from dying and being displaced, and they've been put in prison for it.
I mean, my thoughts on this is that the suffragettes, they sent a bomb to Lloyd George. They set fire to letterboxes, put bricks through windows. That lady threw herself underneath the king's horse. And we hailed these people as heroes of our democracy. And yet, those 2 people basically hung in a hammock from a suspension bridge. And you think of the absolute vitriol poured against somebody who did nothing worse than climb onto a snooker table and dump some orange dye on it, orange dust on it. And these are just inconveniences. And it's all part of the rise of the right and the authoritarian state and the absolute repression of our right to protest. Nowadays you can get arrested for holding up a blank piece of paper when the king's walking past. It's horrific. and we're just letting them get away with it. We're going to be crushed down as a society. I'm really worried about it. Thank you for bringing those two up. I'll shut up. Neil, what was your moment of the week?
Yeah, I disagree that we have the right to protest. We don't. Currently we have a little bit of privilege to protest. We don't have the right because it can be taken away. It's not a right. I've got two small things, if that's okay. The first
Give
thing,
them an inch and they take a yard.
the first thing I want to say is that the fascists and racists went to Lincoln this weekend to spread messages of hate and fear, as they always do. And they were completely humiliated by the turnout of the anti-racist and anti-fascists that turned up to oppose them. Well done, Lincoln, and well done to all the organisations involved. And I believe Kirsty was there as well. So brilliant and well done. I'm sorry I couldn't be there myself, but absolutely well done. Now, the other thing is a report came out last week from the new National Housing Federation, and it said that 2 million children, that's 2 million children in England, are living in overcrowded accommodation with little or no personal space, while some 300,000 share beds with their family members. And as part of the report, they also said that ethnic minority households are 3 times more likely to be in overcrowded houses than white households. Just a reminder, we're the 5th richest country in the world, or 6th, allegedly.
Yes, I saw that report. It's deeply shocking and something. Well, we need a housing policy that works, not one that just sort of stigmatizes individuals. And finally, Paul.
Okay, so mine's a bit of a personal one. I kind of retired this week from local politics a bit, so yeah, that was that's a new thing for me, I guess. I've decided that I'm not going to be on the local council anymore. I just don't have time for it. It's a bit of a shame. I wanted to try and do some good. I think it's very limited what I could do there, so yeah, I've resigned, so I'm no longer doing that.
Solidarity with you.
Yeah, well, sort of the parish councils are basically a waste of time. Sort of, it's if you can get onto a county council, you got more chance of doing some good. That's sad. Have you got anything in the? Have you got any ambitions in other areas? I mean, you left the CLP. You've left. So are you heading in a direction with Socialist Think Tank? Or is this a time when you're going to step back from politics altogether?
I don't know. I really haven't fully thought it through. I just couldn't dedicate any more time to it. So like I do a lot of coaching now, and I'm involved a lot in cycling. I'm trying to get faster myself, things like that. So I'm kind of taking a bit of time for myself, to be honest. I don't have very much time, and Laura would attest to that we're still ridiculously busy. But I think within the political system now, unless there's something going to come out that's new, we've basically got a political system where there's very little you can do at parish level because there's very little money there, very little you can do, and everything's a bit old-fashioned. Like, there's people who mean well, but dear me, it's like trying to drag people out of the Stone Age there. And then above that, local politics, it's just different shades of Tory wearing different badges, and I don't know, the people who seem to want power and who seem to achieve power, the people who seem to have the longevity and won't give up are the ones who are in it for themselves. And I think people will work for longer for self-interest than they will for other people, and you know, I think we saw people come and go within the Labour Party at different times because you just get tired of doing all the work. And, you know, and that's fine. People can do that. But the people who are in it for themselves don't go away. They continue working for themselves, and then they manipulate outcomes so that they retain power. It's really sad, to be honest. It's like we'll always go back to the Phil Wilson. What's the point in power without principles? And what's the point in principles without? Well, he said, "What's the point in principles without power?" to Laura, and Laura said, "What's the point in power without principles?" I actually do think they do have principles. Their principles are to take care of themselves and their own interests, and that doesn't really fit in with people who are going to try and do something for other people, because you've got various targets. So and then you run around trying to look after other people all the time and trying to make sure everyone's all right. And it's just a difficult political system, and until people all come together in the same place, like we've seen it this week with Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott said something really stupid and wrote something really, really stupid, and I think it was easily explained, to be honest. I think what she means is that, you know, like Jewish people and Irish people and Gypsy Roma travel people don't necessarily get targeted because of their skin colour. It's easier to not to be known to be those things than it is if you've got brown or black skin or something like that. People are targeted, and we know this because I know that when I've walked down the street with black friends of mine and so on, I have heard racial abuse towards them. I don't get it because I'm of Irish descent unless I'm wearing an Ireland shirt. I'm pretty sure that's what she meant. She should have explained that. But we're seeing all sides like, blah, 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 Diane Abbott, oh, she's a racist now, and everyone's just accepted it. We've seen John McDonnell's grovelling apology about anti-Semitism when we know that the people who accuse him of that don't actually care about these things. They care about power. So it's a messy situation at the moment, and we're not coming together over it, and we haven't got our arguments straight, and we're not looking after each other.
The Diana, my comment on, and I'll ask Neil and Jane if they've got any comments. They don't need to comment if they don't want. But my comment would be that I think it is clear that there isn't one size fits all racism, that there are different manifestations of racism in different situations towards different groups of people. And it's a multi-headed hydra. And the only thing I've got to say is that the problem is, and particularly within the Labour Party, that it is impossible to discuss that issue and to get to the bottom of what racism really is. Because as soon as you open your mouth and mention any racial group, you're anti-Semitic and you're chucked out. And sort of Diane Abbott might have said something that was ill thought out and foolish, but I fail to see how it was anti-Semitic, which is why she's been suspended. And I mean, she mentioned the word Jews, and sort of, and we'll, unless we can have an open discussion about what racism is, and people have the space perhaps to get it a bit wrong, and Paul has said this on many occasions, we'll never eliminate racism because we don't know what racism is. We don't understand it properly. And I'm desperately upset that this has set us back, I think. And I'll just say one more thing. If anybody in this world has the right to pontificate about racism and the experience of racism, it's Diane Abbott. And I certainly don't have the right to pontificate about racism because I've never experienced it. And I find it outrageous.
I agree. I mean, I was just thinking, I remember one Labour MP, I'm sure it's a Labour MP, who put a racist trope aimed at travellers on a election campaign leaflet. She wasn't suspended. Nothing happened to her. Completely fine. And I think it goes for me when I agree with all that's been said, and I think Starmer was right to suspend her. I do think that, even though it was clumsy, and an apology, and a short suspension and coming back as a little form of punishment, I think would be reasonable. But we know that it's much bigger than that, and it is about attacking Dan Abbott because she's on the left of the party. I
She'll
think
never come back. That's the end of it.
No, I agree, but I think what it goes to is something that came out in the racism report about the hierarchy of racism. And actually, what's happened here is it's proven that it is absolutely there in Labour.
Jane, do you want to remain silent? Have you comment for us?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. One of the things that I was reminded of in seeing the discussions around this on social media was when Keir Starmer called the Black Lives Matter movement a Black Lives Matter moment. And Diane Abbott has issued a heartfelt apology acknowledging that what she said was absolutely wrong. I don't feel that Keir Starmer's reaction to his comments about Black Lives Matter was in any way so heartfelt. I don't think he misspoke. I think he meant that, and I think he should have been suspended and from the party for the considerable upset and hurt that he caused to a huge amount of people through those thoughtless and bigoted comments.
Yes.
So that's what I'd like to add.
I think the difference is if you're willing to learn and if you're willing to apologise, that's it. You're done. You're out. And the thing is, what's the point in anti-racism if people can't improve and learn? And that even goes for Diane Abbott. She can improve. It wasn't a very good statement at all. It was a bit ridiculous. But she apologised and she can learn and she can hopefully move on. And then again, we don't want to lecture Diane Abbott because she's faced horrible, horrible racism. But she's willing to do that herself. But it seems if you're willing to do that, they want the apology to hold it over you forever, and that's it. She's a racist now. Diane Abbott is now a racist, and that is it, according to other people. I've heard racists say it. I've seen online racists saying, that's it, Diane Abbott's racist. She always was. She was always horrible, and it justifies all the abuse that she's ever had. It's disgusting.
And it's so sad. I've got a moment of the week. Can I share? I mean, we're running a bit late on the moment of the week, but can I share my moment of the week? I went to the Joan Maynard lecture at Thirsk on Saturday. Joan Maynard was a socialist MP for Sheffield Brightside, a really powerful woman who fell out with the Labour Party, radically left, for Irish unity, and massively respected. And they started, after she died, they started having a Joan Maynard memorial lecture, and it fell into disuse. But for the 25th anniversary of her death, they reinstituted it, and they had a most wonderful time. And they invited Nogha Levy-Rappaport. Now, you may not have heard of Nogha Levy-Rappaport. Massive. They were massive in the London school strikes in 2019 and gave the most thrilling and inspiring talk. Now, this is not what she said. These are the notes I took, and sort of, so they're basically sound bites cobbled together from what she said. But just listen to her finish here. The finish of my notes about what she said. And if she didn't say these things, I apologize. But they're now inspiring. Our aims are such as green world energy, clean air, etc., available to everyone regardless of status. So they are linked to social change and social justice. A more equitable future, not leaving anyone behind, the end of racism, free movement for refugees, redistribution, reparations, the equitable, sustainable society we deserve. Those are the stories we must tell each other. We have the responsibility to bring about a better tomorrow. We reject the drama and corruption of modern politics, questioning the inability to force change. We must rise to unprecedented heights, including even a spiritual element in our campaigning. There is not nothing we can do. Just by living, we tell our story. By openly telling the truth, we can force the hand of government. We can maintain our commitment. We have no other choice. The darker the world gets, the brighter we must burn. And I was just inspired by that person, and sort of absolutely fantastic. Let's move on.
Now it's time for the big story.
I heard that, Paul. Right, the big story is China. Jane, is China a danger to the world?
So I've come to the conclusion that China is as much of a danger to the world as Western governments want China to be a danger to the world. So this week we've had a speech from our foreign minister, which would normally be on a range of issues, but this year's been devoted specifically to the subject of China, where it seems there's pressure from Tory backbenchers, which has got us into trouble over a number of other issues over the last few years, but wanting the government to take a really hard line against China. So James cleverly didn't go so far as they'd wanted. He did say that isolating China was against the UK's national interests, but he did also repeat a statement that's been made by the US government and the Australian government recently, saying that China is undergoing the biggest military build-up in peacetime history. And he condemned the human rights abuses against the Uyghur people, which he was right to do. However, what he didn't condemn were the human rights abuses against disabled people in the UK that the UN highlighted a couple of years ago, and the mistreatment of people in Guantanamo Bay by the US government. So he didn't mention those. At the same time, TikTok, which is Chinese owned, has been banned on all government electronic devices in the last few weeks. And there was an integrated review policy paper published in the UK a couple of weeks ago, which had some really, really strong language in it, stated that China and Russia and their deepening relationship is a systematic and existential threat to the UK and Europe and other Western states. And there was a comment from
Jane,
China.
can I interrupt you? Existential threat.
Existential threat, which actually isn't all too different from what Rishi Sunak had said in his first speech as Prime Minister regarding foreign policy. He had said China poses a systematic challenge to our values and interests, which is a very strong statement. And then this report has said that again, and it also made the statement, China under the Communist Party poses an epoch-defining and systematic challenge with implications for almost every area of government policy and everyday lives of British people. That is an extremely strong statement. So again, Australia, the US and the UK are all criticising China, repeating the fact that they've got the biggest build-up of military arms in peacetime. However, what we also announced when we released this integrated review is that we're going to put another £5 billion into our defence, which includes nuclear submarines in the Pacific Ocean to defend our island here in the middle of the English Channel. And we're going to increase our government spending on defence from 2.2% up to 2.5% at a time when we can't pay nurses and we can't pay teachers. People can't afford to heat their homes or put on lighting, and we can't help people with that. Food prices are going through the roof and people are starving. Can't afford to do anything about that, but we can afford nuclear submarines to go quite close to China and scare them a bit because they're dangerous, apparently.
I mean, the range of China's impact is undeniably hugely wide, isn't it?
I think that China's ability to harm us is largely of our own making. We've very much sat, not us ourselves, but our governments have sat back over many decades now and allowed lots of things that used to happen in this country to move across to China, so that we're reliant now on China for the production of a lot of goods that, you know, we'd be in a lot of trouble if we did get into a war with China. Presumably for China, there'd be a huge economic impact for them. So I wouldn't have thought it'd be in their interest either. But that's very much of our doing. No one's made us do that, in the same way that no one's made our government sit back and rely on Russian gas, despite the fact we know about Putin, we know what kind of a person he is, and we know that climate change is an impending danger for the world. Rather than just increase our, you know, clean green energy within the country, our governments have sat back and allowed us to be in that position, and in Europe as well, where we're vulnerable to other countries who they may or may not get into arguments with.
Neil, is China? I mean, is China winning?
Winning what?
Winning the race for world domination?
I don't know. Only time will tell that. I mean, you can tell how much of a threat China is. I mean, they've been silly enough to build their country very, very close to many US military bases off the coast of China. I mean, and of course the whole thing about the balloon flying over China. Over America, which was allegedly a spy balloon. And because China is so ill advanced in technology that actually they put a big balloon up to spy on people, but people can see it. It's you know, I'd hate to, you know, God help us if they have a kite flying competition. You know, we're doomed. I think I agree with what Jane said. You know, we've really the reason why we see China as a threat is because, you know, it's down to capitalism. You know, and what we've done is essentially said, well, tell you what, China, here you go. You know, we're going to run 100 meters race against you, right? We're going to wear these absolute big heavy boots that you can't move in at all, but we're going to give you the really nice running shoes, you know, with the studs on and stuff like that, and we'll give you a 10-meter head start as well. And then when they approach the finishing line, you know, America as well as the UK goes, how dare they? You know, I mean, the threat isn't to us. Let's be honest. I don't believe there is a threat to us from China. There's only a threat to us if you're a capitalist. Because I do believe that they have the power to become the next superpower. I do believe.
I'm going to interrupt there, but sort of. I mean, let's think about this. Think about Taiwan. I mean, I understand what you're saying about it, but is there not an absolute existential threat to Taiwan from China? I think that's undeniable. There's sort of appropriating huge areas of the China Sea and alarming the Australians. That isn't Australian capitalism being aggressive towards China, is it? That's the other way around. Sort of you know, sort of think of what they've done to Tibet and the Uyghurs. Sort of, this is not
I'm not saying all is fine. I'm not saying all is fine. I'm not saying that. But you got to remember, we're looking at this through, you know, who are the people who are telling the story? It's America. You talk about China that are building islands in the Pacific and stuff like that. Yeah, you know, they are. But let's be honest with you, America don't have that ingenuity. They just go and take over countries through force and do it that way. You know, so you know it you know, when you look at that kind of in fact, I was thinking this afternoon, there's a real good film by John Pilger called The Coming War on China, where it starts from far back as the Marshall Islands and what happened there with the nuclear tests, coming right up to today, and how America have always seen China as being a threat. They've always been, it's them over there. You know, it's those yellow-bellied people over there. You know, the yellow skins with the funny eyes. It's those people, and I don't really think in reality it's any different to now. But the reason why we've got to have a bogeyman, if you like, in the world, whether that's China or Russia or anywhere else, it's because, for example, what Jane just pointed out about the need for more and more spending on military, because that keeps some very wealthy companies in business, and some people make a hell of a lot of money from that.
Just one last thing. Do you, I mean, China has openly stated that democracy is dying and that sort of Chinese authoritarianism is the way forward. Do you think that there is a threat to I mean, when I was studying all this, I really wondered whether we were on the right side, because some of the things the Americans are doing are utterly unacceptable and much worse than we're getting crossed with China about. But sort of in terms of the kind of government which a world dominated by China would move towards, do we think we're losing democracy to authoritarianism?
It's a great question. I'm actually going to quote something from the John Pilger film, The Coming War on China, where he interviews somebody where the touch on this subject, and what he says is that in America, you can change the government, but you can't change the system. But in China, you can change the system, but you can't change the government. And I think that's that's really what it comes down to is, because of course China is still seen as heavily communist and stuff like that, even though they have very much become a capitalist country, because we've given them the capital to become a capitalist superpower, which where they're heading. And as we were talking last week about the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, I think it is. They're becoming the emerging superpowers because of us thinking, well, actually, we want things built cheaper, further away, and of course, this all feeds into the fact that we have the biggest existential threat is actually climate change, and a lot of the climate we often point to China as being the people who pollute the world. Well, don't tell us to cut our emissions. Go to China. Well, who sold the jobs out there and meant things have to be shipped back here? It's too easy just to blame China. And in all honesty, I don't know the answer to many of these questions. I think it's a question of time will tell. But I certainly don't trust the Americans who I don't think they even lie straight in bed. I mean, the Iraq War is a good example of that. Look at how they've dealt with Afghanistan, and the list goes on.
Spot on. Thank you. I love that statement. I mean, American, you change the government, but not the system. But in China, you can't change the government, but you can change the system. Paul, cleverly, in his speech today, says that we've got to deal with China. That China is essential to so many of the problems facing the world. China's involvement to the solution is vital. But we've got to be pragmatic about the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. I mean, surely that's the right solution. Or what, if anything, should we? How, if any way, should we be dealing with China?
Cleverly has managed to prove the theory that a stopped clock is right twice a day. So like, we do need to involve China, but what it is it's common sense saying like this is a huge, powerful country. We can't bully China. China is huge. China has loads of people, and loads of resources, and is a much more successful economy than ours, and is growing while we fade. So yeah, you're going to have to talk to people. I have a problem with, again, a lot of the time we do things this binary thing, like who's right and who's wrong. It's very, very possible that China's wrong and we are wrong at the same time, and our government are wrong. That doesn't mean the Chinese people are wrong, it doesn't mean that everything they do is wrong, but I think the treatment of the Uyghurs is absolutely appalling, and that needs to be called out. But what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? Because the way we do diplomacy appears to be to threaten and to say, oh, let's do some wars. And it seemed like China weren't necessarily so they aren't traditionally as aggressive as the USA is, for example, who are always at war in another country. China haven't necessarily done that, but that doesn't mean that they're good on either human rights or not invading other countries. They're just better at not invading other countries than the USA are. So yeah, there's a lot of problems generally with the way China are, and the way we are, and the way we're treating China. But it's nice to see that there is some recognition for some diplomacy. I suppose it's quite easy for them though, because a few years ago, they were going to build a nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point, and we were close enough to China to think that was a good idea. So I don't know what goes on. It's really funny as well, because at that time I remember them not mentioning that China were communist, but when China does something wrong, they're all like, communists, communists. It's the red peril again, isn't it? So I don't know.
China is doing some fabulous things in the Middle East, getting much further than any of the Western powers, where our reputation is ruined, of course. And that's the problem, because the West sees China having influence, and they're too powerful. Sort of, thank you everybody for your comments. I haven't got time to read them out, but there's some really good things. And of course, this problem that sort of we have a country that's very powerful and very important, but doing some horrific things on the human rights side of things. So, time to move on.
The story like the back of my hand, 'cause I've heard it all before.
Right, sorry, I didn't hear that one. These wretched Chinese, they're in our technology. Okay, second thing, the problem of prisoners being released, and the lack of support they get. Neil, what difficulties do people face when they come out of prison?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance that the person's in. But this relates to a bill that's making its way through Parliament at the moment, which is called the Offenders Day Release from Detention Bill. And the reason it's going through Parliament is to allow governors to allow prisoners that are due to be released on a Friday to be released up to 2 days earlier, so that they're able to access more services a lot easier. Because, of course, it doesn't take a genius to work out that you leave prison on a Friday. By the time you travel to the area where you're from, or where you've got to go to, whatever, by the time you're there, the chance of accessing any services is pretty much zero. And then you've got to wait till Monday, or if it's a bank holiday, Tuesday. So that's what this all based on. Now, because of course, too many. There's around about a quarter of people that leave prison end up reoffending within a very short period of time, and are far more likely to then be recalled back to prison, which tells you that all that prison is a revolving door. It's better at revolving than it is at resolving. So, of course, when people leave prison, in particular, it seems to affect people that have been in for short sentences, which are 6 months or less, more than others, according to the evidence. But they leave in prison with no homes to go to, no money to live on, no resources, etc., etc., which then, of course, forces people to then commit crimes in order to hopefully find somewhere to be, or survive, etc. But I think it speaks to a wider issue. Is my belief. I mean, we have to remember that in the Tories, I've forgotten the year that they did it. Actually, I think it was 2018. No, it must have been earlier than that, 2016 maybe. They privatised the probation service, which under Chris Grayling, and it was an absolute failure. And it, of course, it had to be brought back under public ownership because it failed so badly. And of course, the whole point of probation, the hard work that probation staff do, is to try to put resources there for prisoners leaving prison to help them rehabilitate back into society. But of course, when they've been starved of the resources that they have as a result of austerity, when the fact we have a massive crisis with housing in this country anyway, and the fact that you've got to wait 6 weeks in order to claim benefits, it's no wonder the system's in crisis. So the prison essentially sets people up to fail. Now, when I was reading what the bill entails, I think I don't have an issue with the bill itself. It's actually, I hate to say this, but there's actually some progressive elements in it within the bill. In particular about allowing it to be 2 days before so that people can access the resources. But I think it's a sticking plaster. I don't think it actually solves anything. I think what we need to do is to have a root and branch rethink of, right, okay, prisons there. When I studied law, I was always taught that the punishment for being in prison is your loss of liberty. That's it. It's your loss of liberty. We need to go back to that, and rather than make it more draconian, more Victorian, we have to see it as that. Well, actually, that's your punishment. But of course, people don't talk about the prison industrial complex where people work for big industries like Kingfisher, who own B&Q, for example, and make light fittings and stuff. That's they get 10 pence a week, well, not a week, but they get paid practically nothing for these expensive light fittings that B&Q. But the problem is that until we fix the system, so that I'd far rather keep a prisoner in prison for an extra week or 2 weeks, so that we make sure that they've got a home to go to, they've got resources and money, and they've got all the support there that they need. And that comes through investment in the system, so they don't need to then be in prison for extra time. That's the way to do it. Simply chucking them out on a Wednesday morning and go, well, you've done your time, lad. Off you go. Sort yourself out. And let's not forget, it puts women in particular who leave prison in a very vulnerable position.
Yes.
Because they're far more likely to then end up homeless as a result. And of course, let's not forget as well, care leavers are even more vulnerable as well. And this is all combined as part of it, because they're far less likely to have families to turn to, etc. And, and care leavers are also, you look at the statistics of care leavers that end up in prison, it's incredibly disproportionate. There's a lot of care leavers that end up in prison, which tells me our systems, our institutions in this country are not good at protecting vulnerable people. They set people up to fail right from the very outset.
I mean, if you're in prison, by definition, you have abiding problems.
Yeah.
And sort of you are by definition the kind of person who cannot be just dumped on the streets and start from ground up without any help. And we do not.
Also, people are far more likely to take overdoses and stuff like that just after leaving prison,
Yes.
because it's to try to get an escape from the fact that they felt abandoned, is for want of a better word.
I mean, I think it was Kirsty Smith saying that. Kirsty Smith, who has experience of this, please forgive us, Kirsty, because I don't. But she's saying people would break their license just to go back.
Yeah.
So awful.
I agree.
Paul,
can I just make one very quick final point? And that's this. This feeds into the government's whole bullshit around being tough on crime. You don't get tough on crime by putting more people in prison so that more people end up failing and end up back in prison. You deal with crime by dealing with the root issues. And a lot of the root issues are caused as a direct result of this Tory government and the cuts that they've made. That means it's far harder for people to get the help that they need to prevent them from going to the criminal justice in the first place. If we had good mental health services, for example, but a fraction of people at the moment would end up in the prison system.
A very wise statement, absolutely true. Thank you, Paul. The Guardian called this issue a scandal in 2018. Is it a scandal? Support is the lack of support. What support do they get, and is it a scandal?
I don't think that's the priority of anything to do with prisons. So they don't get very much support the reoffending rates in this country. Compare them to other countries, it's very, very high. If you look at places like the Scandinavian countries, where they have a very different view of how to deal with this, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. Their reoffending rates are a lot lower. They're not nothing, but they are a lot lower. And the difference here is, again, it's got to come down to mentality. Is it punishment or rehabilitation? And I think very few people in this country really want to see people rehabilitated in prison, and that's an honest thing. We want to see punishment because we focus on the very major crimes. So, for example, like, if someone is murders a child or something like that, most of us would think, lock them up, throw away the key, yeah, that kind of thing. We don't want them to be a danger to people, like where if they've murdered a load of children or whatever. That's how people feel, and that's how people feel about prisoners. But the vast majority of people in prison are not doing those things. They're doing much more minor offences. They are
from a hammock from a suspension bridge.
Sorry, what did you say there, John?
Swinging from a hammock on a suspension bridge. That gets you 3 years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we've got this situation where, a lot of the crimes are a lot less serious than what a lot of people would say, but we still don't focus on rehabilitation for those people. For any people, a lot of people are in prison for minor drug offences, what have you. A lot of people are in prison because they're poor. A lot of people are in prison because they were in care and they were never given the support that they needed to live they live in a sustainable way outside of prison. So I think we need a nationwide shift in what we do, and in the countries where they have low offending rates, they focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. Now, there is still a group of people in this country who would quite happily go for the death penalty, and we have to be aware of that. And a lot of those people are very close to or within government. That might seem like an extreme thing for a lot of people, but there are people who think that that's a sensible choice. How do we change that? I think a lot more understanding is necessary. But until we start to understand people, understand the causes of crime, which are largely poverty, not entirely. Some people are born with different difficulties and different mindsets, and there is some research that suggests that some people are born differently to others and will necessarily do some bad things because of their genetics. That's there's a nature nurture debate there to be had. But at the end of the day, what do we want to do? Do we want to say naughty, go to prison for 10 years, come out and be exactly the same person or worse? Or do we want to say, what's happened? How can we help? How can we stop you from doing these things in the future to make the public safe, to make yourself safe, and to make yourself, live a much more fulfilling life? And I think we are towards the first one there.
Thank you. Laura Daly, much like the racism conversation earlier, people need to be given an opportunity for reform and for learning. I just want to make the point that the people in prison include disproportionate numbers of people who are autistic and people who are dyslexic. And we need to think about that, how they got there in the first place, and certainly sort of how we can stop them going back. Jane, is releasing them 2 days earlier going to make any difference at all? Are deeper reforms needed?
It will make a little bit of difference. It's one positive thing we can do that will make a little bit of difference. But the fact is that the services that are closed that people need access to include housing, rehab services, substance misuse support, and mental health services. And not doing this won't change the fact that all of those services are absolutely on their knees. And even if you have an extra 2 days to access them, you need an extra 20 years to be able to get access to some of those things. So, you know, it's good that we're going to do this, but it's not nearly enough. And there's a statistic I read that prisoners living in safe accommodation, coming out living in safe accommodation, 50% less likely to offend. So whatever you think about this, if we could just make sure that people coming out had safe accommodation to go to, half as many victims would be around, and half as many people would be in the position where they're, you know, reoffending and being put in prison. So that sounds like a win-win situation to me. I don't understand why we can't do that.
Thank you. Just a fact for everybody listening. Only 1 in 10 prisoners has regular access to a computer. And so much of this is about the resources for working with prisoners inside the prison service, which it's just stopped. And that's it. Very quickly, Neil, because
I just want to give a very quick shout out to, there's a newspaper that's published by prisoners for prisoners that's available online, and it's called Inside Times, and it's a very good resource for reading and understanding what life's like in our prisons. Because don't forget, you know, prison officers aren't allowed to strike as well. So no matter how bad the conditions get, they can't strike to make conditions any better. But I just want to give a shout out to
Inside Times, everybody.
Yeah.
God bless you, Neil.
Paper.
I'm so sorry to shut you up, Neil, but you've said some fantastic things. But I just want to get particularly Paul on our last topic. A sort of maths is in the news. What are the chances of that? Paul, I've got some fabulous puns here, which I'm not going to get a chance to make. Paul, what's the problem with maths? Why is it all going wrong? Is it going wrong? Tell us your thoughts.
So every few years, maths gets brought out like it's some sort of like magical elixir that if everyone could do it, then we'd all be so much better off, and there'd be magical. We've gained magical powers as a nation, and you know this is the reason that we're so far behind. But you know, anyone who's good at maths realizes that statistics are manipulated at times. You know, so the countries we often compare ourselves to. So there's in Singapore they use the mastery method, for example. In Singapore they also send children who aren't very good at maths back to work in the fields and say, well, you know, you can go back and be a farmer now, and we won't push you through formal education. So there is a recognition that not every child will take like a duck to water to massive academic subjects like maths. Not that everyone can't do maths. I think like, you know, everyone can be a genius in their own way, but there are some people who don't like sitting there and doing it. The other thing is we've got like this awful system where we just like, we take the fun out of everything in this country. And when Michael Gove created his Govian dystopia of education a few years ago, it was all trying to take it back to the 50s. So we've got a generation of children with access to calculators all the time. There's always a phone in the pocket, but they've got to do a memory test. Like they could Google what Pythagoras' theorem is, so we should be teaching them how to use formulas, not what a formula is. Yet there's a huge section on the maths exam that's all about formulas. The biggest problem in maths that we have is people falling behind in primary school. But again, I think it's down to the love of mathematics. And, you know, there are some really skilled people who try to do a really good job. There's loads of brilliant theory about how to teach people properly. But the pressures on teachers, the undertraining of teachers in this area. I've often found as a secondary school maths teacher that people come to secondary school to me and they, like, you know, they have got such misconceptions about like what a fraction is, and they see American TV where they complain about algebra and they're like, oh no, not algebra, and then they find algebra particularly easy because it is really easy to do because it's just small numbers, etc. See, Neil, you're shaking your head there, and that's part of the issue that we all have is that people will complain that they can't do maths and it is super hard, and that gets a stigmatized. People get a stigma and then they start worrying about maths and they can't do it. Like, you know, that's a maths teacher's point of view. There is a lot of worry and a lot of, like, you know, there was a Let's take an example from today when I was teaching. There's a kid there who isn't particularly strong at maths, isn't particularly good. I taught him something. Algebra, I was teaching him how to find the nth term of sequences, and he could get every answer verbally. It's the first time he's ever been able to contribute anything. Like his math level is quite low, and his confidence is even lower. And yet there he was doing something that was really, really supposedly difficult. If you saw it written down, it looks difficult, and it's not. He could do it, and he gained a load of confidence from that. So everyone can do it, but we've just got this awful pressurized system in this country where we're just trying to force square pegs into round holes all the time. We don't value things like, we put down jobs like cleaners and caretakers and all these maintenance jobs that we get that are the most important things that we do, that are low paid, and expect everyone to go into academia. Like, what kind of country is that? What's going to happen? What's the end outcome of our education system at the moment, where the idea is everyone becomes a maths genius and everyone becomes a genius at everything else, and they'll all go to university? What's going to happen to the country then? We're just going to have a load of people writing papers about things, and the whole country will, like, probably burn down in about a week. So, we've got a ludicrous situation based upon a 1950s private school ideology. That's the problem that we have. We also have some difficulties with our number system as well, because like we're a year behind Chinese kids by the time they're about 6, because of their number system, because they would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 and 1, 10 and 2, 10 and 3, which makes it easy to do things in the base 10 number system. Whereas we would say 11, 12 is their own functional thing. So like teaching a child that 11 is 10 and 1 is an extra step. Whereas if you just name a number 10 and 1, you don't have to say that step. It's a step missed out. So that's actually problematic as well. So there's all sorts of different problems, but the solution to our problems in this country, what a weird thing to come up with. Oh, you've got to learn maths to 18. Like, yeah, do it if you want, but it's not gonna help. Do it. You don't even have enough maths teachers to do that.
Thank you, Paul. We're running out of time. A lovely discussion on the chat. Everybody's sharing how awful they are at maths.
See, you're the problem. You're the problem telling everyone you can't do maths. That's it. No, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Stop it.
Do you know, when I was at school, my teacher said to me, right, do you want to learn algebra? I said, why? I've got no intention of going there. But this is the ultimate divide and rule tactic, isn't it?
We have 2 minutes, so you've got 1 minute each. Neil, what do you reckon to Rishi Sunak's idea? You're calling it a divide and rule thing.
Yeah, you've totally missed the joke in that, but yeah.
That's brilliant. That was fabulous. God.
Thank you. I'll read back the comments later on to get my fix of laughs. But yeah, doing maths from 16 to 18, I don't see what another 4 years of maths is going to do for anyone. I really don't get it. I mean, but I think the problem is more about the language around maths. I take on board everything that Paul said, but the fact is we mix up between the imperial and metric system in this country. So, for example, you buy your fuel in litres if you've got a car. You buy your fuel in litres, but yet we measure how efficient cars are by miles per gallon.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to, and your time's up. God bless you. Thank you. You can shout at me after the show. Last word to Jane.
So we need to look at the diverse educational needs of children and nurture and help them to develop and be the best people they can, and do the things that interest them, so that we can have all those valuable things in our world like literature and songs and art, as well as maths.
Thank you. A sheepdog gets all the sheep into the pen, says to the farmer, all 40 sheep accounted for. And the farmer said, we've only got 36. And the sheepdog said, I rounded them up. And on that bombshell, thank you everybody for all your comments. Thank you team. Your comments are just fabulous every time. Thank you to Paul, to Neil, to Jane. Thank you. And I'm now going to say goodbye from me. And I'm just going to let Paul give the final words as he always gives. And we'll go. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm going to just leave with this one. I'm just going to say thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you particularly to John, because he always thanks us and he never gets any thanks himself. And I'm sure everyone at home thinks he's absolutely amazing and they love tuning in just to see you. And look at his face there. You look so delighted that I said that, John. Then I will also say, go and tell people about things. Tell people about independent media. Go out and recruit like 5 subscribers to Socialist Think Tank. That's your job. 5 subscribers to Socialist Think Tank's YouTube channel. And we'll see you all next week. Okay? Everyone happy? Take care. Thank you so much, you at home. That's what it's all about.
Next week. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Keep the red flag flying.